Mr. Anderson, and we're going to work on the dovetail jig today. I know this is something that many of you struggle with the first time or second time using that, so I decided to make a video while we're on hiatus here for the COVID-19 to help you guys out when we get back to school. All right, so the first thing we're going to review is all of the parts and kind of the pieces that make this jig work. So starting from the top, we have our scrap piece, kind of backer board clamp right here. So there are two knobs on the left and right side, and then there's one cam lock lever here in the middle. So what you need to do when you're going to lock in your backer board piece is get these knobs just tight. It doesn't have to be like Hulk tight, but just wheel them down, and then you take that cam lock lever and push it back, and it should tighten it down the rest of the way. So that's how that top backer board piece gets put in tight, and then when you go to remove it, just do those things in reverse order. So I pull that cam lock off, loosen the knobs, and then I'm able to work that backer board piece out. One note is we want to make sure we have a nice clean edge on that when we first get started, so that way it can really support the board that you're going to cut into as we get started here in a minute. Moving down closer to the front, we've got the template guide. So this is where you're going to put the router into, and it's what tracks the router as we go ahead and cut that dovetail. There are two sides to this. We'll talk about that before we get started. But there is a lock knob here on the right and the left too. Again, you just tighten those up. Make sure that the template is actually between the knob and this kind of golden nut or washer, whatever you want to call that there, because that's how we are able to adjust the template in and out as we work here. And then the last thing here in the front is we have a very similar lock to the top, also in the front for our actual workpiece. So again, there's a lock there. We're going to pull the workpiece out for right now. There's a knob on the left and right side. That's how you fine tune the clamp. And then I could push my board up here to the top of the template. We'll wheel those left and right knobs in until it gets close to tight, and then I'll finish that with the cam lock to hold my board in the rest of the way. Okay. The last thing that we want to point out, and I'll go ahead and move this board so that we can properly see it, is on the left and right side we've got a stop block. So right here it's a little bit covered with sawdust, but that stop block on the right and left hand side are actually adjustable. So I can take this Allen wrench and we can loosen that, so that way we're able to reset it in or out, so that way we can get our material properly centered in the template when we go to get started. So if you're doing more than one part like I am today, I'm going to work on 3 different drawers. I want to be able to have the same cut over and over on all 3 of those drawers. So that'll help me be a little bit faster and more efficient, because I've got this stop block already locked in to where I need it to be to make that cut 3 different times. Okay, so if we look at the chart that's over here on the far left of the jig, it'll tell us which router bit and dovetail bit we need to use. So the first one we're going to use is a dovetail bit, and that's 4377 6PC. So I've got that here in my case. I already got it loaded up into the router. And then we also need the correct template guide. That's going to look something like this. The actual one we need is a 42040 template guide, and that's again already installed in my router. So I'm ready to cut the tails on the first front piece for my drawer. Double check all the knobs one last time to make sure everything is tight. All those cam locks are down. But before I can get started, I've got to set this router up to the correct thickness for my material. Now on this particular Porter Cable Dovetail Jig, they have these little buttons here on the side. So I could actually take my router, flip it over into the correct spot, and I could twist it down and it would just hit that little guide there, and that should be set for the correct depth for my part. Now, I find that at school, sometimes those get adjusted. Somebody doesn't quite know what they're doing, and they unscrew those or rescrew them, and they get a little bit off, and so that's not a great gauge. Something I found that's foolproof is we can take a scrap of the exact same material we're using, and I hold it right up here underneath the template and to the top of my scrap or my workpiece there, and then I pencil underneath it a line, so that way it shows the exact thickness of my material on that front board. I can then take the router and we flip it over so that the base plate of the router is sitting down on the template, just like that. And I'll unlock my router, and I'm gonna adjust this, try to keep my arm out of the camera's view, just so that the router bit comes down to the pencil line. Okay, just like that. So that way I know that it's going to the exact right depth I need for the thickness of material we're working with. Okay, you notice I've already got that guide in here. We've already got the dovetail router bit in there. It's a tapered router bit. That's how we know it's a dovetail bit. It also has printed on the side of the bit the exact same number that we've got on the side of the jig. So we know that that all goes together. Okay. And the one last thing I didn't mention when we were clamping everything down is we want to make sure that this little groove that has been milled into the template is actually lined up with the seam between my scrap piece or my backerboard piece and my workpiece, which we are here. So we're ready to go and get started with the dovetailing. Okay. Before we get started, one thing to note is it does make a mess. So it's going to throw sawdust at you. Make sure you've got safety glasses on. Sometimes the routers are loud, so you might want to have hearing protection. If you've got really nice clothes on, you don't want to get dirty, grab an apron from the finished room because it throws a lot of sawdust. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. The biggest thing is so that we don't damage the router, we don't damage your workpiece, we don't damage the template guide is when you're routing, you want to make sure that the base plate on the router always stays flat on the template. Here, if while I'm routing, I accidentally twist to the side, that router bit is going to be able to cut through the aluminum on this base plate. Unfortunately, these are $75 a piece, so we don't want to do that all the time. We got to be very cautious of what we're doing. We can also easily damage that router bit, or if you lift up at an angle, you can actually cut into your workpiece at an angle, and then your dovetail is not going to fit tight like you like. So let's just try to keep everything in good shape and keep your base plate flat on the template. And then as we're routing, once you come to the end, make sure you shut that router off and wait till it comes to a complete stop before you lift the router up and off of the template. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to get it in the first spot. We'll get it turned on. Okay, so that's how one looks there. We can see how that router bit comes to the end where it's a little bit rounded, actually finishes off into that scrap board, but right on my workpiece, it's left a nice, clean, straight cut. So we're gonna work that all the way across. We'll show you that here in just a second. All right, so I went ahead and waited until the router came to a complete stop. So now I can go ahead and slide it out, set it over here off to the side. It's done moving, so I don't have to worry about accidentally cutting into anything. Okay, so what oftentimes happens is even if you've measured this and laid it all out perfectly, you may have still been off a 32nd or a 16th of an inch. And what can happen is when you go to route the other side of your drawer front, like I'm about to do here, is we take this board and students will flip it like this and slide it back up in here. If I do that, what happens is if I was off a 32nd here or an 1/8 here or whatever, and I rotate like this, it's now gonna, instead of being off on this side, it's gonna be off on this side. So now I'm off on this corner and I'm off on this corner, and it's really hard to fix that on two opposite corners, okay? However, if I go back to the original position, which was this one, and I take this and I flip it top to bottom, and now I put it back up in the jig like that, if I'm off on this corner, it's gonna stay off on this corner. So now we could run this through the joiner one pass and fix that instead of having to try to fix it from two different sides. So we always wanna flip top to bottom. We don't wanna rotate. So now I'm gonna go ahead and slide this thing back up in here. Again, tight to the top and tight to the left side. We'll push that cam lock down just like that, and we're ready to reroute this side. All right, so we've got both sides dovetail routed on the drawer front here. So we're gonna go ahead and transition to a side so that we can get that full interlocking joint to show you guys. So I've taken this board out. We're now done with the first part of this template. So we're gonna switch this whole thing around. So I'm gonna go ahead and loosen these two knobs here in the front, take this template guide out, and we'll flip it around. So we're to the second side. And again, I'm gonna push it down tight to my backer board piece so we get the spacing for the thickness of our material correct. I'll go ahead and tighten those lock knobs back up. So now we're to the side that if you look over here, it will say pin depth and pins. It also has some lasered in text that says looser joint, tighter joint. What that means is, and then it has a pair of arrows there, one showing to go in, one showing to come out. And we have that same milled in groove here along the back. And what that allows us to do is if our joint doesn't fit together, so if I go back over here to our demonstration piece and we try to pop this together, if let's say it doesn't go together the first time, maybe our piece is too tight, we can take and I can move the whole jig back with those lock knobs so that way I can make this joint a little bit looser. Or if I put one together and instead it was too loose, you could see a lot of opening between where the boards fit together, we can move that whole jig fixture forward so we can make that joint a little bit tighter. But if you read the directions on this, the location they want you to start with is having that milled groove so that it's centered on the front edge of our backer board piece and the back edge of our workpiece that we're going to slide in here in just a second. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grab one of these side panels. And again, I'll slip it up into my cam lock here. I left the stop block in the same exact position. This jig is designed so that you don't have to move that stop block when we switch the template around. I've got the template or my workpiece up tight to the template there. We've double checked to make sure that groove is right down the center. If it wasn't, what we do is we loosen this lock knob, and then I can adjust this gold ring that we showed you earlier, and I can either roll that gold ring backwards or I can roll that gold ring forwards, and that's gonna move and adjust that top template guide so that we can get it centered up on our parts. So it looks good. I'm not even gonna adjust it anymore. It's still flat tight on there. Now, the next thing I need to do is adjust my router. So my router was set up with that first router bit we already talked about. Now we need to switch, and I've got to double check which router bit I need to use. So we were using a dovetail bit. Now we're using a straight bit, and we need to switch to the 43743 PC. I've got it right over here. And then we need to switch to the correct template guide of 42046. I've got that one right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and off the screen, switch my router bit and guide out, and then we'll be back in just a second. We check back to our two demonstration pieces that if there's a certain side that we want facing out, like maybe you've already dado grooved in for your drawer bottom, or maybe there's some certain grain pattern you want facing out, you wanna make sure you have the right side facing out. So just for your reference, the side that you've got facing out right here is going to be the side that's facing outside of the inside of your drawer, okay? So this is what you would see if your drawer wasn't going to be hidden in a cabinet, okay? So the back side of this would be the inside of your drawer. That's a little bit confusing, but that's how this is set up in this jig, okay? So for my case, I don't really care which side the grain shows, so I just loaded it up how it is right now, making sure everything's tight once again. And I'm gonna take one of these demonstration pieces and mark my line underneath there again. And again, that's so that I can set my router up because I switched bits. I've got to reset the height on that. So I'm making sure the base plate is flat on the template. We'll go ahead and roll the bit up till it lines up right about there. and we can lock it in. Looks like it pulled it up a little bit. Okay, that should do it. Got it all locked in. And this one's a little bit different. So on the last one, the template guide actually locked in perfectly between that template. On this one, since it's tapered, as you go in, you want to make sure that you're riding that left side of the template with that guide ring. And then as you roll back out, you're rubbing to the right side. And then the left, and then the right, and so on and so forth as you work your way down your part, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and demonstrate that here. And remember at the end to pause, wait for your router to come to a complete stop before you lift it up off of the template, so that way we don't accidentally cut into that template, okay? So we'll go ahead and get started with that. So we've got this first side cut. We'll go ahead and pull it out, and we're going to do a quick test fit to see how it goes with the front that we've already got cut. So, let's see here, get this thing organized. And it looks to me that we're just a little bit too tight at this point. And so if we're a little bit too tight, what the jig says to do is we've got to roll that back just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and reload this part in there. Just like that. Lock it down. And I would take this front lock knob loose, and I'm going to roll that golden ring back just a little bit. And again on this side just a little bit. You don't have to do a whole lot for it to change things, because if you move it too far back, you're going to make that joint really loose, and then it's going to be difficult to glue, and it's just not going to look very good. So we'll go ahead and try this again. All done moving, slide it up. All right, so I went ahead and recut this after I adjusted that gold ring and moved the whole template back a little bit. We fine-tuned it, and now we're ready to go ahead and test fit it. So I've got the front, and I've got the side that I just cut, and we're gonna line it up so that they lock together. Just like this. It should be pretty tight if everything worked correctly, and it's gonna take a little bit of maneuvering to get that to fit in tight there. Sometimes you may even want to grab a mallet or a hammer. I might bring it right over here to this table, and I can just kind of knock it down with my hand. Or you can keep kind of twisting it just down and back and forth, working those two boards together until it closes, okay? Now I got one corner here that doesn't want to cooperate. There, I've got it popped back in, and now we can see how it came together really tight there. That black isn't actually a gap, that's some pin marks. We can see where it's really tight over here on this side. If it does open up a little bit, like maybe how it's tight up here, but it's slightly open at the bottom like that, when you go to clamp it, just remember that, and your clamp will be able to draw that in. What that is a little bit of cup in that board there, allowing that not to sit very flat and even inside that joint. So we want that to be together nice and tight like that. It's pretty flush here on the top and bottom. That's within pretty much how we'd like it to be. So now the next steps for this drawer would be to go ahead and route a bottom dado groove in here for our drawer bottom, and then we can get them mounted up into the cabinet that they've got to go into. So that is a completed dovetail joint. We would go ahead and glue that. We'll show that to you later. The biggest goal with that is we just want to work this apart In fact, sometimes I tell students too, if your joint is just a little bit loose, that's okay, because what's going to happen is as you put glue in here, it's going to expand that wood just a little bit, and that helps take up some of that slack sometimes. I mean, it can't be super loose, but just a little bit loose, that's going to get taken up with that glue expansion once we get that wet. Okay, some people don't like to get it on their fingers. Typically what I would do is I just get glue and I get it in all of those fingers, every single spot. I do one side, then I flip it over. I'm going to do all those other sides. You could use a little brush if you don't like to get it on your fingers. And then we can just take and slide that together, and we would clamp it. So that way I am clamping from front to back and from left to right. So I want to do all 4 sides of the drawer at the same time. So that way I could clamp from front to back and from left to right and help hold those joints all together tight.